welcome everybody to this What the Fucking Art about what the fuck is cloud native transformation. And I am joined today by two old friends of mine, Pini and Jamie. Just in case you haven't met them before, let's do a quick round of introductions, shall we? Pini, do you want to go first?
I'm originally an engineer that moved into marketing and recently sales. My name is Pini Reznik, and I'm also co-founder of Container Solutions and co-author of the book Cloud Native Transformation.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, I'm the other founder of Container Solutions and the other author of this book, which I hasten to add has 27 5-star reviews on Amazon.
29.
29. But our average is pulled down. Average was pulled down, Mark, because it was printed on bad paper by O'Reilly, and somebody gave us 2. And they said, good book, but bad paper. And they've dragged our rankings down.
Yeah, and that'll be permanent. So there you go, mate. You're going to have to get over it. All right, so we're just going to go through. So this, like I said, this webinar is about what is cloud native transformation. But there's a few other things we want to share with you as well. The book, if you grab your camera on your phone, point at the screen right now, this will take you through to a link to get the book. You can also go to containersolutions.com and there'll be a link there somewhere. And I'm sure we'll be able to put some links in the chat at some point. So if you're curious about the book, go and get it. I got it a few weeks back and it's very good. Probably 4 out of 5 I'd give it on Amazon. Okay, next one is the mailing list. So there's a lot of activities that you've probably seen coming out of Container Solutions around this what the fuck theme. And if you want to know more about it, you can go to that QR code with your phone and you'll get spammed by Carla with all the exciting new things that are coming up. And then last but by no means least, the next one in this series, which it looks like, what's that, 15th? So 3 weeks from now, roughly, is with Michael Feathers, and it's about home-based law. So when can you sign up for that one, Carla?
Sorry, it's like Jamie said, it's literally next week. So people, you don't have a lot of time to sign up, but I'm gonna share the link on the chat, and everything is on our website in Container Solutions.
Ah, right. So the date's wrong on this one. No,
mate. It's the 5th. You do know it's April. Just check in.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I'm in the wrong month, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now we're in April. There's something I don't actually know.
So that's going to be next week. Very good. We're going to get through cloud native transformation, and then we're just going to make sure that I understand the months correctly, but we'll come back to that one later. So we've had some questions submitted by people who signed up, and I'm going to kick off by asking a couple of those to you, Pini, and to you, Jamie. It's a shame that they've been anonymized, though. First question, top of the list, probably one for you, Jamie, is when can we do beers again? Not quite sure who sent that one in.
We never stopped at Container Solutions. We have not stopped. In fact, we increased our consumption in the pandemic. I do believe that means when can we do beers in real life again, physically?
I think so.
So it depends where you are, of course. In London, the lockdowns are all lifting actually this week. And because we work here in the city has got people on the street drinking now, right outside the office. And they started at 11 o'clock this morning. So if you were in London or in the United Kingdom, you can probably look forward coming to see me and the team soon. That will include Carla. If you're in Germany or the Netherlands, I'm afraid the governments have screwed the pooch a wee bit. So you'll be waiting a bit longer for the vaccines to get rolled out. If you're in America, you can't meet me because I'm not there. But we will be doing drinks there because I think you can do what you like in America, according to Twitter.
Very good. All right. I'm going to keep going back to these questions, but I've got another one now I'd like to point at Pini. Somebody asks, does cloud native transformation equal digital transformation?
Sort of is and sort of not. I think traditionally digital transformation comes from the business perspective, right? You're old and outdated bank or something, and you really want to attract a young and excited crowd and build applications, then you go through digital transformation. So that's typically the angle of this. The cloud native transformation is typically coming from building cloud infrastructure and building microservices and other things. But at the end, they're all the same. It's ability to build software fast in more interactive way, in agile way, go to the cloud and build all this kind of different things. So it's not really different, and it has many other ways, like agile transformation, DevOps transformation, or whatever else.
All right, thanks for that. So, like I said, we'll come back to some of those guest submitted questions later, but now I wanted to jump into the meat of it. Obviously, we're here discussing cloud native transformation, and you spent all this time writing that book. And I just want to kick it off with a question about the impetus for going through a change like this. In the book, you talk about the stranger coming to town, the business competitor who suddenly arrives on the scene and can serve customers better than you can, and how that is often a kicking off point for people hurriedly searching for something that they can do to protect themselves. Maybe you could talk us through the genesis story of using that way of explaining the impetus for doing this, maybe how some of your customers have gone through that change by the stranger arriving.
Do you want this one, Pini, or shall I take it?
You can start, and yeah.
So a few years ago, when we wrote an ebook, The Cloud Native Attitude, and that was written by Anne Curry. And this was before really this book had gotten off the ground. And in the end, when she'd finished it, it became, quite a popular download. And she reached out to all different companies to interview them. And one of the common themes that all of the companies had is they faced an existential threat. So she spoke to people in print media that if they didn't get online, they wouldn't have a business left. She spoke to retailers who, if they couldn't provide a channel for people to consume their products online, they would die. People were only moving to cloud native, and Pini's right when he spoke earlier about transformation. When we think about change, it's like you change one thing for another. You substitute beer with wine because you're on a diet. Transformation speaks to something much more fundamental. In the case of digital transformation, going from a print, an analog environment, for example, in a bank, to the use of digital products and computers. So the common theme that kicked this off was what we call an existential threat. There was something extremely threatening. And the truth is, you cannot go through a cloud native transformation, something so traumatic, so difficult, requiring such a huge different range of skill sets, unless there's a good reason to do so. That good reason is usually a competitive threat.
Doesn't that also sometimes mean, though, that when the impetus is there to go through that change, it might be a little bit too late? How should companies be more reactive before waiting until there's an existential threat to their company, or is that just the way this works?
Well, our business model is based on people not doing this on time. That was just a joke. That was just a joke. Well, if you speak to Simon Wardley or follow him on Twitter, he would tell you, forget digital transformation, baby. Get straight to serverless. You've missed that wave. In an ideal world, you want to go early. One of the threats that we've identified, competitive threats, is an incumbent, somebody who's already in a strong position, who does indeed go early with cloud native. That's what ING Bank did in the Netherlands. They knew what was happening. Everybody knew what was happening, but they moved early, 12 or 15 years ago already. That being said, it's not too late. There is such thing as a first mover advantage, but there's also such thing as a late mover advantage. Because 10 years later, we've learned a lot of lessons, commoditized a lot of tools, and we know a lot. Pini.
Yes, sure. I think in my recent sort of more advanced thinking after the book was finished, so what I realized recently that since decades ago, the software is built to last for a long time, right? You very, very rarely going through really transformational change, like virtual machines or something like that. And what you really do is you try to build a system that will survive as long as possible, sort of a castle, right? Like a cathedral. And this is just not sustainable anymore because the world is changing so fast that you're going through change basically every second year, every third year. So you really cannot optimize for long-lasting projects. because you need to go through the change every second year, and you really need to reduce the transformation time from 2 years to maybe 2 months. So you really need to optimize your environment, your capabilities to fast change. It's an entirely different strategy, right? But once you move there, and it doesn't really matter if you're using Kubernetes or serverless, right? That's you can just do whatever you like then.
So is it really the case that all industries need to be, players in all industries need to be good at changing so quickly? Surely there are some boring parts of the world where this might not be necessary.
I'll give you an example on that. We recently spoke with a company who are doing physical devices, essentially IoT devices that check physical infrastructure, right? So robots that are crawling around and checking physical infrastructure. And you would say, like, what them and the cloud, right? But in reality, they are full of computers, those devices, and they're independent. So if you put some of the data in the cloud, then you can make smarter decisions, right? You can do this kind of data analytics and manage fleets of devices and do much more advanced stuff. And it's just more value for the customer. And this is how less cloud native or how less digital company can be than that. And yet there's a strong business case for that.
I think you're right to ask that question, Mark, but it's not about boring versus non-boring. Most businesses are boring. Most businesses run for a long time selling one simple product or service into a huge market. It's more about practical versus non-practical. 150 years ago, we had not electrified our societies. We hadn't. We'd invented electricity, we'd experimented with it. But once we started to electrify, factories could stay open 24 hours a day because we could light them. And they didn't need to be positioned next to rivers because we could use electricity for power rather than water power. At some point, they would have been the latest adopters, people who still had a generator in the corner, chugging away. They were not making much money and not super rich, quite a boring business, as you said. And at one point, the generator would have exploded and packed up. And then they'd say to each other, well, what are we going to do? Why don't we just join the electricity grid? So there will always be a business case for utility computing, for cloud computing. And actually, every year that passes, the business case for it becomes, really, really obvious. So I think most people will want to make that switch in the next 10 years.
Maybe we could talk more about the human side of this. I mean, obviously, cloud native transformation, cloud native, the term has tended to be dominated by technological discussion. But I think one of the things that you do a very good job of pointing out in the book is that it's really a human discussion that we're having here. Could you touch more on that?
At the end, technology is changing every year, as I said before. Right? And at the end, it's those people who are managing the enterprises or companies. They're used to build things in a certain way, and they try to build this new way of adapt to this new way of software world. And it's just difficult, right? The things need to happen much faster. The hierarchy doesn't work anymore. There needs to be much more independent work, continuous delivery, and all kind of sort of perceived lack of control over whatever you're doing. It's just difficult, right? And most of the teams, when we see that people are not capable to adopt those technologies, yes, there's lack of understanding of technology, and there's a problem of using the technology. But this is typically because they didn't build learner organization, because their organizational structure, their hiring processes, their mentoring processes are not there to make sure that people can switch and adopt new technologies. In a healthy company, there is never a problem of switching to a new tool. But for that, you need to be learning all the time.
So it's interesting, Mark, because the subtitle of the book is not practical patterns for staying the same. The subtitle of the book is practical patterns for innovation. And this is what most people don't realize about cloud native. It's not about Kubernetes. It's partially about psychological safety, but it all ties together to allow for innovation. It's a system of innovation specifically for digital products that run at scale. And so if you'd lift the lid on any innovative company, if it's a cloud native company or whether it's IDEO out in San Francisco who specialize in physical products, you lift the lid and you will find people who are experimental, open for feedback, many of them with postgraduate degrees in one thing or another. That's what innovation looks like. And so what was the question again? I forgot the question.
The human side of
Right.
cloud native, there's less about technology.
Right, exactly. So the innovator has a specific character and personality. I'm sure if you looked in their brains, there'd be areas of their brain that were developed and other areas that were underdeveloped. So what we're doing, if we're bringing innovation into large companies, then we're bringing in a feel for entrepreneurship, for newness and for risk. For most companies, I mean, this is like, it's beyond what they do. And in fact, you work for a large corporation because you're not innovative. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't innovate in any areas of my life other than work. In my private life, I'm quite boring. There's nothing wrong with that. But the people that are drawn to a large organization are not the ones who are most suited to change that organization into an innovative one.
So it's an interesting question. If I don't suppose any companies really, or people running companies really get out of bed in the morning and think, how can I make a company that doesn't innovate? But yet everyone seems to fall into that trap anyway. And I'm wondering if it's something around the biases that you mentioned in the book, where people have the right intentions, but they have the wrong information available to them, and they end up structuring companies in a way that's anti-innovative.
Well, I'll take the first bit, then I'll hand to Pini for the biases. You're wrong, mate. Loads of people wake up every morning with that exact goal. Let's be less innovative. They want to drive out change, strengthen processes, and remove variance. That's what nearly everybody here in the City of London does. They exactly want to drive out innovation. And I once read an interesting article, and the person was asked, why don't you innovate? And the answer was, because it's too expensive for us to do that. It's cheaper to let somebody else innovate, and then we'll buy them when they've got product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's exactly correct, right? You don't want to innovate because innovation is chaos, right? And chaos cannot scale, right? So new innovation, when you have a new piece of technology, it cannot bring a lot of money. You need to stabilize it and remove the instabilities and unpredictability. So essentially, only when you go to economy of scale, you can make the money. But the problem is it's one direction. So as a startup, you have this innovative spirit of exploration, right? This is a difference between, finding the path from one street to another in New York, right? Or landing on some deserted island, right? The strategy of going from place to place are very different. On a deserted island, it's you sort of walking around and like you're trying to figure out what's going on and map the situation, right? In New York, you just plan it as efficiently as possible. I think what happens is when the company starts is by definition a startup and innovative, then it becomes mid-sized business and then grows into enterprise. And the goal of enterprise is to scale and make billions. And at that point, they just forget how to innovate unless they intentionally put in place the three horizons things, like the innovation practices, where they intentionally spend certain time on trying new things. And it's okay that they don't work, right? But in an enterprise, normally it's not okay for a project to fail. That's how you drive away innovation.
So,
and by just one more thing is about biases. I remember the biases. Majority of biases are about status quo, about preserving the situation, or running away very quickly. Those are the two types of biases.
So wait a minute, when you say running away very quickly, does that mean to the chaos of innovation?
No, I don't think there's too many biases about that. It's basically when you're scared, you're running away, but most of the other times you want the same.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I did a presentation once, and it was about something like cloud native is not about technology, and it was about culture. And I think I ended the presentation by saying, when you say we're going cloud native, it's almost like asking a cat to be a dog. It's really a radically different change. So if you work in a company that is driving out innovation in order to drive up profits and drive down costs, it's very difficult to say to that person, now I want you to innovate. I want you to lead a company where failure is okay, it's okay to take risks. And of course, we always advise the people we work with that they've got to be the change they want to see. So many executives come the next day to work without a tie on. And I'm like, we're gonna have to do a bit better than that, everybody.
It's this interesting thing. Like everyone know about 20% Google innovation thing, right? Everyone understand it very well, sort of, right? But in how many companies? Probably in the majority of large enterprises, there is some sort of this kind of arrangement, right? And never there is innovation, almost never. So what Google do, they create a process, they create an environment when they really empower people and really create this environment where they can try different things, experiment, sort of scientific approach, and then create products that will later be scaled. Today in Gmail, there is no innovation, right? Or Google search, there is very little innovation.
Okay, so let's come back to, we've looked at the human side of transformation. We've seen why actually many companies don't want innovation, but if they do, there are a lot of things that they can take from the book. I want to bring it slightly back down to the technology side of things again and ask, before we get into patterns, what are the most common mistakes you see with companies that are trying to move to the cloud, go cloud native, adopt Kubernetes, whatever it is?
I think the most common one that I can see is trying to do the new thing in the old way. Basically, the most common situation, you have a company that is pretty much waterfall. Like maybe they have some sort of Scrum setup, right? But it's not real agile. And they have this kind of strong hierarchy, enterprise architects, very long planning process. And they say, let's move to cloud native by using the same mechanism without changing the organizational structure. And then 6 months later, they have very long 100 pages document and still no Kubernetes clusters.
Jamie, what do you see as the top mistakes people are making with going through this, whether it's technological or otherwise?
I can do a psychological one. People can be rather stupid. That's probably the first one. And if you go back, if you link back to what Pini said about risk, where it's okay to fail and it's not okay to fail, a lot of executives are macho. And it's not just because they're men, they often are men, and very often they're called John. There are more CEOs in the world called John than there are female CEOs. And the problem is, in organizations where you're not allowed to fail, people overcompensate by being macho. So when it comes to cloud native transformation, they want to go big and they want to go early, right? Let's get this done. And they throw loads and loads of money at these things, millions of pounds. And of course it leads to failure because it's an all-encompassing change. With cloud native, it changes how you design products. You don't have a design team per se, but you're listening to user feedback with A and B variants, or you're monitoring the application in real time. Application developers don't just build the stuff anymore, but they run it, which makes them ask the question, hey, if I'm building this stuff and running it, am I an entrepreneur? In which case, you need to pay me more money. It's an all-encompassing change. So to go big and go early, which is a bit of a heuristic in many organizations, is really rather silly. This is a classic mistake. And when we talk about the journey, I always emphasize this one, because you need to do the opposite. You need to go slowly, understand the landscape, understand the risk profile, and as you gradually drive risk down, you can then start to think about ramping up, usually after about 8 to 15 months. The Duke of Wellington said, there is nothing so stupid as a gallant officer. This is the rule.
All right, so I'm going to take a quick pause here just to let people know, if you're listening in and you've got questions for us, you can feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll get to them at some point. Like I said, some people are pre-submitted, so I'm going to be reading those out when we get gaps throughout. I wanted to change the focus a little bit now to introduce the idea of patterns. You've used the idea of patterns and pattern languages and designs as the sort of teaching tool throughout the book. And although I'm sure everyone recognizes the word pattern, they might not be familiar with the concepts behind it. So I wonder if maybe Pini or Jamie, you could introduce us to that and why you chose that approach.
I can do that. I think generally the biggest challenge in this kind of adoption of new ideas is the unknown unknowns, right? The things that you don't even know that they exist. So basically, you have no language even to discuss an options about something that you don't know that exists. So patterns are tools introduced in architecture, like physical buildings architecture in 70s and 80s by Christopher Alexander. It's basically to create this common language between the architects who build design houses and the users of the houses. Because architects know the options in architecture, but the users of the buildings, they don't know the options. They don't know how to plan the house. So they speak in this weird language. I have 3 rooms and that's it. You don't know what are the options. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to create a language that is advanced enough to cover major concepts of construction, but not too deep, so you don't need to be a professional. So the idea of patterns, of cloud native patterns, or patterns for cloud native transformation, is exactly to create a language that is common between the experts like us and the users, people who are going through transformation, so we can jointly plan the future, right? The whole idea is to plan the future of the business together, because we understand how cloud native technologies work, but we will never understand the business the way the actual people in the company understand it.
I think one of the important things about patterns, Mark, is that they are context specific. So I've actually got a pattern in my hand. I also see my friend Victor on the call as well. This pattern is for automated testing. And the whole point about patterns is they're context specific. They're not context independent. And I like to give an example from the 70s from Alexander of the bus stop. A bus stop is a waiting pattern. It's a waiting area where people can be sheltered and have somewhere to rest. But you also need a waiting area in the hospital. But we don't put bus stops in hospitals. So the whole point of the patterns is it's a shortcut between an expert, in this case me and Pini, God help us, and a novice user. And the reason the context is important is because most people, when they're new to anything, don't understand the context. Public cloud might have worked at Netflix in a business that sells videos. Public cloud might not work in a European bank where they're subject to different regulations. So the context always comes attached to the pattern, and it helps you think, right, if these are the conditions I've got, and this is my context, hey, this pattern might be for me.
Thank you. So there are 70, is that right? More than 70 cloud native patterns in the book. How do you want people to consume the book? Should they read from start to end? Should they dip in and out for little patterns that they see that might tally with some of the experiences that they're facing?
So somebody asked me the other day, should I read the book end to end? And I said, well, even Pini and I haven't done that.
I think the best way is to read it end to end, but skip the patterns and then sort of skim them through, because they're quite detailed. And there's a lot of them, and about third of the book or even half of the book are patterns. So you can go all the way to the patterns, then sort of go through and then finish the book. The ending is actually, everything is preparing you for the ending, right? How to actually do the transformation. Patterns are not the goal. And then later on, when you need more details, you can come back to the patterns.
So maybe you can, so people can read through the story, skim the patterns, but importantly, it's all coming down to that final stage that you mentioned, which is your think, design, build, run plan. Could you maybe talk us through the individual stages there, why you chose them, and how that roughly works?
Yeah, and so we're also talking about this imaginary company. And what's the name of the company?
WellsGrid.
WellsGrid. Yes, WellsGrid. Thank you, and Jenny. Basically, the idea is that Jenny and her company going through the transformation, and we are basically guiding them through these 4 distinct stages: think, design, build, and run, where it's very sort of natural. Think is the stage where you define the strategy, the business goal, choose the team, all kind of different things that you really don't want to go too deep into execution before you don't want to start doing things that can be thought out through just a thought experiment, right? Or a bit of conversation, right? What's very important with think stage is not to overdo it, right? Because normally in enterprise, you would spend 6 months in thinking stage. That's not right. It shouldn't go more than 2 or 4 weeks. And then the second stage is design. That's where you need to uncover all the answers for all complex questions, right? So you need to, and that's not just the technology, it's also organizational structure, cultural changes, everything. So you want to build small number of effective teams running on cloud native infrastructure and fully agile and everything, right? And they select the right technology, select the right organizational structure, the right processes. And by the end of this design stage, you know what you're doing. You're back into known stage of just continuing development. And this stage typically takes 3 to 6 months or so, depending on all kind of things. And after that, you just never stop, right? You produce at the end of design stage, it's MVP. So you have something functional, but it's not fully built. It's production ready, but it's not everything. And from that point, you gradually onboard more and more teams and then go and continue building your systems, improving them. That never ends. And the run stage is the maintenance, right? So that's basically keeping things running, but in proactive way, there are better ways than just fixing failures.
Mark, if I can share my screen for 1 second, because I had to prepare some materials for the CNCF. Yeah. And I can give a visual representation of what Pini just said, if that's
go for it.
If that works. So let's just take a look. So can you see here the steps: think, design, build.
Yeah.
So it's important to note that this is to do with cost. So think is almost free. With the pattern cards, with the book, a cup of coffee on the weekend, and with your colleagues at the whiteboard, what you're trying to do is generate hypotheses. What might work for us? You really don't need a £5 million transformation to work out what will or will not work in your context. And then many of the hypotheses can be instantly dismissed or thrown away because they just don't make any sense. The handful of hypotheses you've got left, should I use hosted Kubernetes on Amazon? Should I train some of our key people? Versus a different scenario, should I go on-prem? These hypotheses you can test experimentally. This is what we're doing in design. So we're back to the idea that we try one thing, that doesn't work, we try another. And then when you've stacked the odds of success in your favor, that's when you start to think, right, now we can go big. So the visual representation is really this. At the beginning, there is so much risk loaded in cloud native, it's unbelievable. So what we're trying to do is slightly increase our investment in terms of cost. And once we think that we've de-risked enough, wallop, we can go on the full transformation. And the rule of thumb around all of this stuff is really, if I can find it, this was my quote of the week: never take 2 years to do what could be reasonably done at the whiteboard. And really, that's what TDBR is all about.
It's surprising how many companies going into this kind of 2 years, actually 5 years, and many, many millions, and then achieve nothing, right? Achieve an amazing Kubernetes setup and no applications running on top of that, or something like that, variations of that. It's just amazing how much money and time you can waste on doing these kind of things, and you can easily avoid it.
Pini, do you remember when extreme programming came out? I'm sure you and Mark remember those days. And the reason why extreme programming was radical is because they said, we're going to discover our requirements as we build software. And it was radical because we used to do requirements up front and then said, now we're going to build it. What people are doing, they're using a 2 or 3 year transformation of millions of pounds to discover their requirements, to discover what setup works for them. It's crazy.
But it's right. So it's the right strategy for the world that doesn't change often. Right? This is this castle and cathedral story. You don't want to be experimental when you're building a castle. You will have no second chance. Right, so essentially, if you are building a thing that you know will need to survive for 10 years, the right thing to do is to plan it for 2 years and then build it properly. But we are not living in that world anymore. That's the problem, right? And trying to build a cathedral, right? By the time you finish planning it, it's already outdated. Right? That's why you see all these enterprise architectures. When people try to build absolutely perfect cloud native platform that covers all failovers and multi-cloud and all kind of like everything, right? But it never ends. They never go to production, like not even in 5 years.
I always think of cloud native as being a type of dance. As your users' needs change and evolve, your products evolve almost in real time to meet these new and different needs. So the product lives in constant evolution with the user, and that product can only evolve as quickly as it does with this immense infrastructure behind it, both actual infrastructure in terms of computing and the processes and the mindset that keeps us dancing this dance. That's why the building analogy breaks down, because even buildings that grow don't grow as quick as a cloud native application does.
Thanks. I'm just looking through the chat. I didn't realize there was so much discussion going on about Gmail, but thank you for jumping in there. Very good. We also got one question that I want to go to now from Nigel, who says, I'm an agile coach working as a contractor in a large corporation to bring a different approach to the third attempt, in parentheses, it's already failed twice, at doing an IT business process project. To use Jamie Dobson's analogy, I'm trying to train and coach cats to be dogs. Is there anything in the book that can help? I think probably quite a lot, Nigel. Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Hello, Nigel. Thanks for coming in.
Pini, yeah, this is a fireside chat. If you want to ask any more questions while you're on camera, go for it.
Let's get this one out of the way first.
Yeah, let's do this. Pini, do you want to tackle this one, or shall I have a go?
Okay, I actually missed the first half, so probably either you need to repeat it or you take it.
I'll do that. So Nigel's at a company working as an agile coach, trying to get them to do the third now after 2 failed IT business process projects. And it feels to Nigel like he's trying to train and coach cats to be dogs, which I think really means having a hard time.
It does sound a lot like the world's great story. So it's a good story to read. There is also like 3 attempts to go. And of course, the last one is successful because we are involved in telling them how to do it. But I think the question really is why, right? And that's the thought experiment that needs to happen in the beginning. Why it fails? Is it happening in the same way? Is it focused too much on technology, or is it not? Like, there has to be a real reason, I think. And I think in the book we go through different scenarios, like a dozen different scenarios, how transformations go wrong. So maybe those scenarios could help. Like some examples, you're introducing Kubernetes without doing microservices, or you're doing on technical level, or microservices without CI/CD, right? If you go microservices without CI/CD, it's impossible to deploy them manually. It's just, I don't even need to explain why, right? On the other hand, if you have very strong hierarchy and you want like traditional change control boards, and you need to approve every change to go to production, that cannot work with continuous delivery, right? So you need to be really holistic on all different technical, organizational, and cultural parameters. And I'm sure that in a transformation that doesn't work, there is some of those things that are not changing. Either the organizational change is not there, or technology is not there, or something else that is not aligned.
Nigel, I hope that's helpful. Any more questions for us, just drop them in the chat and we'll come back to them a little bit later.
Before we move on, Matt, can I ask now, is there executive support for this change?
Yeah, in fact, there's widespread, there's almost too much change across the whole of the organization. So they've shed about 20% of the workforce, as well as trying to reinvent a whole new culture across the whole organization. So there's a lot. So there is executive sponsorship there, but there's also many moving parts.
Is the main focus cloud native, or is there many other focuses right now?
There's lots of other focuses going on.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right. A lot of focuses is not a focus, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, I've tried to say to them, you know, you want to try and limit your projects in progress in order to, from a lean point of view, to bring down the amount of things that you can do so you can actually achieve something. So they have many things, you know, in progress, but it's a difficult one.
Best thing you can do is you can download the book for free right now, and then you can distribute that across. But it sounds like more of a management and a business problem, but definitely do that. And then if you and your colleagues are interested, you can do a cloud native workshop online with us, and that might get you unstuck. But you need C-level buy-in for this. Has the chief executive taken their tie off yet?
I don't know, actually.
I want to get to that. Okay, fine. Cheers, Nigel. Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to get through a few of the other pre-questions we got from registrants. Let me see. What are the steps between using containers until full cloud native architecture?
Right.
So like the steps between running Docker locally and then being fully cloud native, perhaps.
Yeah, I get that, right? Right.
Oh dear.
There's a lot of steps. But I think what's important is first, even on basic technical level, running a single container is trivial, right? It takes a few seconds and it's just run a command and you have it. Going from there and running a containerized system in the cloud in distributed environment is entirely different beast, right? There is nothing in common really. It's like they sort of both include containers. I think the point here is not to miss the organizational change and prepare to it properly. So there needs to be an experimental stage. But actually, the first question, what's the business case? Why you're doing it in the first place? And then who is going to lead the project? It sounds very big and difficult, but actually those questions typically can be answered in like an hour. Right? And then, yeah.
It's not dissimilar to saying, what's the difference between opening a Michelin-star restaurant in London? How long will it take after I've fried my first egg? Yeah. About 30 years of practice. There's even so if we look at page 92, I don't know who asked the question. Now, if you look at page 92,
Anonymized, yeah.
There's actually a graphic that explains this. That we start here and we have our first containerized application here. And if you look very carefully, the graph says this is the uh-oh moment. And that's because when we've containerized our first application, we think we're close to cloud native. But actually, on the architecture side, you're miles away because you've got Kubernetes, you've got observability, you've got chaos testing to make sure it's always working. But there's no point having all of that if the people around you are not continually integrating their work and running A/B variants. You get no benefit. So I'm afraid, I'm very sorry, and I think, Pini, you're sorry too, aren't you? You're a very long way from a cloud-native architecture if you've just containerized something.
Yeah, I think it's a different, really. It's like this egg and 5 Michelin-star restaurant, or like you're having a single house in a city, right? Because yes, it's full of houses, but there's also infrastructure, education, other buildings. That's why we have all this like 70 plus patterns. It's a complex process. And unfortunately, it's not intuitively easy. Like from intuitive perspective, like it's not a natural transformation. I mean, so if you are just doing whatever you used to do, you typically don't get to the right place. So you need to adjust your mindset.
If I go back to the CNCF webinar, can you see my screen again?
Mm-hmm.
So if I put it in full screen, does that work?
Yes.
So basically, Mark, to come at the question from a different angle, many people think cloud native is just this architecture bit. And so, for example, there's a tightly coupled monolith, and then in the last 10 years, we broke up the monolith to have a client, a mobile client, a tablet client, etc. And therefore, since we've broken it up, we must be close to microservices. That's true, you are. But of course, on the technical side, you've got provisioning, you've got your infrastructure and all of that. But even that's a mistake, because this is, making you think that cloud native is a technical issue. Applications on a cluster, on a cloud. But actually, if you look at it in its totality, none of that makes any sense unless nearly all of your dimensions are up here on the right-hand side. So the maturity matrix really shows that there's a tremendous amount of work to do after you've containerized your first application, and you get something like this.
And where can people find this maturity matrix online? Is that available through your website?
I think Carlo will be happy to put it in the chat.
There we go. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go back to a couple of questions that came in before. I'm going to combine two. So the first one is, what's the best way to get a cloud native transformation started apart from reading your book? And then the other one that I'm going to throw in here is also, if I'm not from a development background, how can I ensure that I'm good at cloud native, or how do I understand cloud native, I guess is the question. So resources for non-technical people looking to do cloud native transformations, and best places to start for any of those brave enough to try.
There is actually, although it explicitly says without reading the book, but actually in the book, there's a consistent story, how to start a transformation. Like this think, design, build, run, and there are specific patterns we are using in each one of them. But the general idea is, if you're in let's say, medium to large size company and you're not cloud native, you want to be cloud native, the first step is to find a champion, somebody who will lead and fight for it. The second step is to get executive support. So really, there will be significant changes, and a company needs to understand that there is a business case for that, there is existential threat, there is reason to do that, and the executive team understands that it will support it with money, time, and whatever other things. From that point, it becomes more technical and organizational change. So there needs to be a consistent vision and experimental approach towards slowly building up the knowledge and experience, and expanding, like starting small with one application, maybe on small cluster on the side, something not super important, and from that expanding. Because if you bring too many people, or you don't get the support, or all these things, then everything suffers, right?
Yeah.
But the best way is,
And obviously, don't speak to somebody whose business model is based on you consuming more compute. So don't speak to a cloud provider or one of the vendors and say, how should I start with cloud native? Because they'll say to you, if you've got a container, you're nearly there. So don't speak to anybody who has got an axe in the game or a horse in the race. As a more neutral perspective, people can start at the CNCF's website, cncf.io, where there's lots of resources and case studies. They can also sign up for our newsletter, where we also just, provide very similar materials. It is a good community, isn't it, Pini, in terms of resources?
Yeah, it's and also there's a lot of collaboration between competitors. It's everyone related to cloud native is in CNCF. It's and they're really good in managing this whole events and content creation and everything. So it's a good starting point.
So when I give my standard presentation, I always say that the character from the book, Jenny, she either reads our book or she discovers all of this amazing content online. But the point is that she learns that cloud native is something more than technology. Pini, should I take that second question about how do you do cloud native if you're not technical? Cloud native is a bit like rugby in that the sense that you have all different kinds of position. If you're a huge short person, you can go in one position. If you're a huge long person, you go in another one. There's lots of space in the cloud native in a cloud native environment for all different skills. If you've got good leadership skills, you'll find a place. If you've got low-level networking and Linux skills, baby, there's a place for you somewhere. I guarantee it. It might not be what they talk about at conferences, but it is distributed computing fundamentally, and all of that requires many, many skills that you might already have. So explore the matrix, find out where you fit in there, and do a bit of reading, and I'm sure you'll find a place.
Thanks, Pini. Thanks, Jamie. We've actually had another suggestion in the chat for anyone who else wants to read another book from Stephen Hartley. There's a book here on architectelevator.com/book/cloud strategy. So go check that out if you don't already know it. at over 500 pages and with 70 plus patterns, it's kind of difficult to ask, to know which questions to ask. I have too many, but there is one that came in that I thought was interesting. And one of the things that when I was reading it through felt a little unintuitive at first, which is a lot of companies delegate cloud native projects to their IT teams and otherwise take a hands-off approach. Why is doing that a bad idea?
This is one of the most common problems that we see is because the change requires more than just technology. I mean, traditionally it was like you run a server, now you have a VM. So now you can put more things on the same thing, but still there is no impact on the business. It's just some different cost structure or different people who are doing. But generally, all this IT stuff is like, we have this bunch of engineers in the basement, they like just take care of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is entirely different in cloud native. In cloud native, you use the technology to build better products for the customers. The speed of innovation requires very tight and very quick feedback loop from the customer to developers. So your product teams, your customer success teams, everyone who is interacting with the customers are immediately involved in improvement of the product. And the product can change today, tomorrow, in a week, not 2 years from now, not a year from now. Unless you have these processes, like these business processes to listen to the customer, all this Kubernetes stuff is basically irrelevant. It's a waste of time.
It's a misdiagnosis, isn't it, of it as a technical problem. Fundamentally, cloud native is a collection of practices, processes, and tools that connect a user to product designers, to people in IT in an infinite dance. Starling Bank appears at the end of the book as a case study. I'm a customer of Starling Bank. I love it. And the CTO always tells this great story because it's a financial institution. You have to get changes to the application approved by your chief executive. So the chief executive is in the product development cycle as an approver. And of course, she does that on Slack because it's a modern company. So this idea that somehow what we do is disintegrated or not whole is really quite backward, in my opinion. And it's a bit like saying in a rugby team or football team, you're the players, we're the doctors, we work in the stadium, and the idea that there's no interaction, you will not get the life-giving value of cloud native if you simply think it's a problem for somebody in IT to fix.
In very simple terms, if you have a product that is planning every 6 months release, what's the point of having continuous delivery? But if you have no A/B testing or things that are actually taking feedback from the customer, I mean, what's the point? If you're not changing for 6 months, why do you need microservices?
Right. So to answer the question directly, Mark, then following from that, there is a book called Accelerate, which covers research topics. So why is that a bad idea? Because that book proves it scientifically, the more you release, the more you develop, the more holistic you are, the lower your bug count and the higher your profitability. So that's why it's a bad idea to do that.
With Starling Bank as an example, that's a startup that was able to build from scratch. I think one of the things that people find quite difficult when going through digital transformation is knowing where to start. I just read, as in which parts of the stack to actually begin disrupting. I recently read Ask Your Developer by Jeff Lawson, the CEO over at Twilio. And what he says is that his heuristic for this is anything that involves interactions with your customers or anything that's differentiating from a business point of view, you need to be building yourself internally. Would you agree, or would you add anything to that?
That's a good heuristic. It's a good heuristic. So if you've got lots of servers and for regulatory reasons, you don't need to be on premise, then let somebody else run compute for you. And that's very strange. That's exactly the same reasons why a startup would consume utility computing, because they also don't want to run servers either. So ultimately, there's a reason that we outsource accounts, legal. Most companies don't have a legal department. They've got a lawyer that provides their services. And only at a certain scale can you justify that. So it's not a bad rule of thumb. So basically, you start with the bits that have become more commodity, which for most people is compute. But unfortunately, this is where there's a slight problem. you can't just move to the cloud to solve that one issue, because they bill you every month. So if you move to the cloud and move all your stuff over there, they'll send you back a massive bill. So usually we lift, re-architect, and then shift.
Yeah, there's connecting to the previous thing, why the IT is not the best department to lead the transformation is because they will choose to build a platform, right? Because they love building platforms and tools and technology and using technologies. Well, they like if you ask them, should they use vanilla Kubernetes and build everything on top of that, or buy OpenShift or Rancher? They love building things themselves because they typically IT departments people saying that they're smarter than others and they can do a better job. But who cares about the platform? I mean, it's commodity and it's not a competitive advantage. Right? The competitive advantage is the website that sells the stuff, is the logistic system that shortens the time between deliveries or all kind of other things. It's not the platform. Who cares about the platform?
Tell you what, Mark, another place to start, so Pini's right, another place to start is software as a service. Now, we're going back about 5 years, but one of our earlier customers was using Elasticsearch, and they had, I think, a handful of people who maintained it every month. So you can imagine the salaries, 5 salaries, 12 months a year. And we said, why don't you just consume Elastic Cloud as a service? And it had never crossed their mind. And so those 5 people could work on something different. And actually, for a fraction of the cost, they were consuming Elasticsearch as a service. So that's another area as well. If you're doing, if you're still managing parts of your stack where there's an alternative in the cloud, you should certainly look at that.
I want to talk a little bit about managing risk. Now, Pini already spoke a little bit about one of the approaches here, and you mentioned that as well, Jamie, which is don't go big and plan something for 12 months if you're only going to need it for 6 months. That doesn't make any sense. But specifically in companies that are looking to move towards cloud native technologies but have large existing user bases that they don't want to harm, or companies that are in, I don't know, banking or insurance where there's a lot of regulation around, what are some of the heuristics or patterns that people can use to manage the risk of trying to move towards this innovative approach of building software?
Very simply, it's gradual approach. It's not all or nothing. There's this tendency to build a full system and then move everyone next Friday. And that never works. You need to build a basic system, and it's, people are looking for a simple answer. I'll give you like a one pattern, and if you do that, then everything is fixed. Actually, it just doesn't work this way. It's a long journey. It takes 1 or 2 years to become cloud native if you know what you're doing, and you need to learn different things and behave in different ways. So there's sort of sequence of events that need to happen. And the most important thing is you cannot try to solve problems. Like, you need to be incremental and experiment through actually trying doing things, then learning from that, and then doing more of the things that work.
Yeah, so knowledge is the antidote to risk. So the real question becomes, how can we systematically increase our knowledge? But at the same time, the executives supporting the work need to understand this. And one of our retail customers, they would, for example, if they're going to try something new, in fact, this is a common practice for all retail organizations. You always try something, a new product, a new feature, on a place where you don't have many customers, so that when it goes wrong, you fix it there rather than rolling out. Most executives should know this. So it's an interesting question that 2 engineers, me and Pini, get questions about risk, because most executives should know how to de-risk a project. And in fact, if it's a new HR system or buying a new company in a new geography, they know how to do that. But for some peculiar reason, when it comes for technology, they all of a sudden can't think straight, and they lose their ability to do risk management. And in fact, there's a very famous essay written on the Harvard Business Review exactly about this. And so you also need to sort of confront the idea that normal, sane executives, they go a little bit insane when faced with technologies they don't get.
A very interesting observation in the last few years is that almost every time a large enterprise will come to us to buy our services, they will want full predictability of what's going to happen. They want to plan with every thing in every day and every month what's going to happen, by what time they're going to get all kind of different things. The thing is that it's not possible, right? Because we jointly need to go through education process, learn new things. We have this 3 patterns together. They sort of provide the structure for it is no regret moves. Like before you go and do like no regret moves, option and hedges and big bets. Before you commit to a massive acquisition of big tool, like for 2 million euro, it does make sense to test 3 different tools for 3 days each. Right, and then invest maybe a month in experimenting with one of them, and unless nothing wrong happens, then buy the 3 million or 2 million euro tool. Right, it makes sense. And if people buy like financial products, they know this, but somehow they come to us and they expect us to just know what's going to happen.
So just to be clear, what we're talking about is scenario planning. Different outcomes, different scenarios, which they teach at A-level business, not even university. Every executive knows this. Every executive run their business based on scenarios. And then when it comes to cloud native, say, I want to guarantee that this will work first time. And there's a sort of weird reversal where Pini and me try to re-teach them what they already know. And it's true, the 3 horizons model is really important. And I felt bad because we stole it from McKinsey. And then later I found out McKinsey stole it from this book. So then I felt less bad.
All right. So I've got a couple more questions. Now, we don't have a fixed end time, although we do have a hard limit at past. If you've got any more questions, get them into the chat now. We can ask those. If not, we'll get through the next 2 questions and then we'll probably wrap it up.
Mark, what we usually do at this point of proceedings is we say, if anybody's brave enough to grab the mic and grab the camera, we'd love to hear from them, and we'd love to see their faces. If they want
yeah, love that. You don't have to go through the chat. If you want to come on camera, do so.
Now
people plucking up that courage.
We've still got the same number of participants as at the beginning. This is always a good sign.
What, that they didn't all just exit us 5 minutes ago? I think that's extremely good news. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. This is like a key performance indicator. Did people hang around?
So I wanted to talk about, the book was released, let's have a look, November 2019. Now, obviously, it's been a bit of a mental year since, but also that means that more than a year has passed. What have you two both learned outside of what was already in the book in the last year that's expanded your thinking here?
That whatever is written there is even more important than we thought, and there's even more urgency to go cloud native, because the world is, we thought that world is changing fast, but who could expect what, the last year, right? It's just such a dramatic change. And the things like our customers, their entire businesses are changing, right? They're tripling the amount of traffic on their websites, right? In the same time, the stores are closing. The oil went to like -40. I didn't know it's even possible that you need to pay people to take off your oil off your hands. It's basically companies who were cloud native, they struggled less. And these changes will only continue being faster and faster. So there is more and more pressure to become, cloud native is just a word, but to become ready for anything that will come after you.
Yeah, that's true. He's right. The big change is, the first one is this forcing function. I don't know if you've seen that really funny Mercato cartoon that says what was the reason you went on a digital transformation? Was it this, or was it COVID? So people have been forced to accelerate the plans that they already had in place. But the dark side of this, and the truth of economic recessions, is this: all companies have to learn to do more with less. And one of the best ways to do more with less is to automate. So there's also now an economic pressure for people to automate as well. Now, that being said, back to the question, what did we learn since we first did the book? I learned don't ever start a startup. It's too tiring. Probably patience, Mark. Maybe patience is an element. Like, there's a lot of people who are scared, right? They've been invested in these technologies for a long time. You know, if I hand over a simple process at Container Solutions, I always feel sad. I'm just handing something over to Christian, our COO, and I was a little bit sad. I wonder what it feels like to hand over a product you've been building for 20 years, or to realize that the thing you've been building actually is now a source of some of your problems. Mm-hmm. And imagine how that feels if you're 44, which I am, or 54, and all of a sudden you're confronted with, you know, this notion that you might not be relevant. So I think building compassion into the way we listen and the way we advise, it has definitely come to the surface, because as well as all these, you know, feelings of your work being made, you know, redundant, you've now got these issues of COVID and people being sick and they can't travel. So I think realizing the trauma of big large scale transformation is definitely something I've learned.
Yeah, I enjoyed that cartoon with the COVID thing, and it has been sort of amazing. I think when the dust settles on all this, certain industries will have been absolutely shaken to their cores. We got another related question coming in the meantime, and also I see that there's some interested in getting packs of those shiny cards, and it looks like Carla can help you out. So put your name in the chat, and we'll get those sent out to you. Jens asks, how do you sell a cloud native transformation to the C-level and get their buy-in? C-level tends to put cloud native to Kubernetes. I guess that means compare the two and just make it a technical problem. How do you get them aware that it's way more than that?
Actually, it's not exactly true, right? I think this is a technical person speaking to executives, thinks that the executives think that basically there is misunderstanding on different levels of the organization. What we find out that when engineering managers trying to promote cloud native within the organization towards the executive team, those who bring technical terms. And they just don't speak the executive language.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually a lot easier. I can see the question came from Jens. It's a lot easier than you think, because it's easy to explain. And even in Netflix, the very first chapter of Netflix is about a cultural problem where they had to fire people. And another chapter from a different book is about, you know, how it enables product design. Very famously, one of the chief designers at Google resigned because they decided which was the best blue link through A/B testing. And he said, well, what's my job? What's the point of me being here? These stories are easy to tell and quite easy to get C-level people thinking about, not least because you're usually about to save them millions of pounds and a lot of headaches. So just with the maturity matrix, a little bit of whiteboarding, you can really start to bring people around to this way of thinking. It's actually other people in the org that are harder to convince.
Yeah, I think it's the challenge is when you come to an executive, senior executive, board level or CEO, and you say, I need Kubernetes because, you know, clouds and stuff. They're like, I don't care. I mean, I have business to run. But if you start saying, we will build better products, we will save that much money, then the language, but the conversation is entirely different. I think a bigger challenge, so senior executives typically understand transformations and understand business challenges. I do agree with Jamie that the challenge is a lot more with middle managers and architects, because if they are fixed on their current way of thinking, their mind is it's very difficult to convince them to change their mind and just experiment, right? Embrace the ambiguity is like the most terrible thing you can say in an enterprise environment.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, wait a minute. There's more. Oh, okay. Everyone's basically just signing up for the cards now, so that's fine. So I'm going to share some slides again, just to remind you all. So this is what we've been discussing today. If you want to get in touch with any of them, container-solutions.com is where you can contact people. I'm sure there's also Slacks and Twitters and all sorts of other things. For the book itself, point your phone at that, and somehow it'll arrive at your house. I don't know how the magic works in the middle.
It's a digital book.
It's a PDF. Well, but I did the same thing, and I got a physical one. I think maybe Carla did me a favor there. All right, fair enough. For this one, obviously there are more events in this series. So this is the What the Fuck is Cloud Native series. If you want to see what's coming up next, you can sign up for the mailing list by going to that one. And then last but not least, not 3 weeks from now, because we're already in April, next week, Michael Feathers is going to be speaking about Conway's Law. So that's worth checking out as well. I'm assuming the sign up link for that has been shared or can be found on
Mark,
the website.
I just shared a link to the Harvard Business Review essay about why high-profile digital transformations fail. And this is what I said earlier. It's because of macho ramp-up behavior that leads to quick ramp-downs. In other words, executives forget their risk management training. To just answer Jens's question one more time, it's easy to discuss this with Cs, because once you start to explain risks, scenarios, you're in a language that they understand. So if Pini and I say, hey, listen, why don't we just let's run these 3 experiments in the next 12 weeks. We know we're not going to get you the answer you need, but we'll get you one step closer. And all of these strategic models is really something that they do understand. So if you're a middle manager or you're an engineer new to strategy, our book is actually not a bad place to start. And then from there, launch yourself into more of the mainstream strategic literature.
Fantastic. All right, so some links are coming through there now. That's probably all we've got time for today, unless there are any last minute questions. While we're waiting for those to come in, I'll say a quick thank you to everybody involved. So Carla, thanks for putting all this together, and Teresa, of course. Jamie and Pini, thank you for your insightful answers. And of course, thank you to all of you attendees for coming and making this possible today. Very much appreciated. Looks like there are no other questions coming in. So on that note, I'm going to say goodbye as well and leave.
Yeah, and thank you, Mark, for a great hosting as usual.
That's my pleasure. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Awesome. Cheers, Pini. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.